What's up, guys? On our third attempt, we're finally live. I had to reschedule this one a couple of times. I'm kind of glad I did because I came into a lot more information. And this is a really uh, interesting, important, and complicated subject. There are so many tributaries to follow to really wrap our heads around this. And the research that I've been doing and listening to autistic people and other types of neurodivergence talk about their experiences on various platforms and Reddit groups and whatnot, it's really become clear to me that this is actually something that's extremely important. Neurodivergence is a very broad term. And because of that, I think, people only have so much the parameters of our vantage point from our singular ego are not broad enough. We're only going to encounter certain manifestations of this as individuals, I guess is what I'm saying. And so people get kind of a skewed perspective about what it means. A lot of people, when they think of autistic people, they think of like Rain Man level savants and whatnot. That's kind of how I've always thought about it. It never occurred to me that I was one until this is something that has dawned on me very gradually over the last like 8 years, since my mother's funeral, when my stepmother, a step grandmother, told me that my mother's father was autistic. And some bells started going off then. But yeah, the last couple of weeks I have really shined a lot of light in a lot of really interesting places. And the combination of high IQ, early childhood trauma, and neurodivergence actually, they are all sort of catalysts, or they all, I don't know if I want to say complement each other, because it's as much a blessing as it is a curse. And so what we're going to do here is look at the sociological issues. I'm going to use my personal story as sort of a template, and this is going to be part one, where I'm going to kind of lay out the traumas and the necessity for hypervigilance that causes this enhanced pattern recognition that, when combined with high IQ, can look like parapsychological phenomena. It gets really wild. And that was one of the most mind-blowing things, to go into these platforms and hear all of these people talking about how they've been able to predict everything accurately all their lives, and people always think they're nuts, and then they're always right, and still no one notices, and they won't acknowledge it. You know what I mean? And just so many parallels like that. It's really astonishing. For me right now to be processing all this. There's so many things. The chronic fatigue syndrome that's plagued me my whole life, the gut issues, those are apparently very common with people that have neurodivergent cognition, I guess. What else? BPD, borderline personality disorder. I definitely had that when I was younger. I got control of it, but that's been a wild thing to see. That we have the same health issues, we have the same mental health issues, we have the same predisposition to seek for truth and apparently find it, which is one of the reasons this is so important, right? I don't know if you guys have noticed the federal government in the United States demonizing autistic people and talking about creating camps. And, there's a reason that they want to medicate this out of existence. There's a reason they want to label people with these kind of capacities as somehow dysfunctional. I've heard RFK Jr. talk about how we're not capable of contributing to society, and that we are just generally problematic and a dead weight on the what do you call it, the welfare system or whatever. And that is because they know that we see through everything. We see through people, We see through institutions. We see the holes in the narratives. We see how they've created the ontological gridlock. You know, we are a major threat to the status quo. And we are also subject to a lot of unnecessary additional trauma and damage from society at large, because we are mocked and ridiculed and gaslighted. And, you know, for myself, the inability to trust my own experience, I guess, it's not just that. It's not just culture and society. My parents were super fucked up, and we'll get to that. But it's true that, yeah, I mean, the number of people, it's almost all of these videos that I see and, you know, reports in Reddit groups and stuff about people questioning themselves their entire life because, you know, society says that we're wrong about damn near everything. And it turns out that we have parallel processing, and that we see connections that people have literally been trained not to see. And that difference in our experience of the world is drastic enough that it is like an ontological dissonance. There's an ontological dissonance between people like myself and more neurotypical people. You know, it's been really helpful for me to realize that part of the issue here is that people literally just can't understand. They cannot perceive things in the way that I do. They're not going to. I'm never going to be able to explain it to them. You know, one of the ways that they have created the ontological gridlock in society is that, you know, say the average IQ in the United States is 100. All you have to do is set the parameters to engineer the system so that it is a little bit more sophisticated than, say, a person with 120 IQ can, you know, it's beyond their computational analytical fucking powers. They'll never get out of it. They're trapped. They're stuck. They're done. There's nothing they can do because they cannot understand anything beyond a certain level. You know, that's it. There's a gridlock there. So yeah, let me look at the chat real quick, and then the epistemic dissonance is even more distressing to me than the ontological dissonance. Well, the one leads to the other, I would say. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, though, because one of my conversations with one of the AIs that I've been using to do research, I actually mentioned that empiricism has sort of corroded common sense. And it's like, if you go in one direction long enough, you end up right back where you were, right? So the ignorance and superstition and the, I guess, just incomplete ontological model, or the, you know, all of the shit that comes with being ignorant and superstitious, right? That's what was driving them. We're trying to escape that. We got sick of witch burnings and whatnot, you know? And it's like they went so far that it sort of became the same thing again. And that's one of the major things that I was talking about with the gaslighting, the institutionalized gaslighting, and causing people that actually see the truth to question themselves. That's really the crux of it, you know, that empiricism, taken too far, has sort of given the collective a frontal lobotomy, you know. And Grok actually, I'm thinking about pulling it up, but I just don't know how long it would take me to search through my history, because I don't remember exactly how it put it, but it was something about how, like, the intuitive and the reason, the balance of these things has just been totally fucked to the point where it's literally, you know, it's not that people are stupid, but it's like an equivalency to stupidity. You know, what this protocol for understanding our reality, you know, has done to people. And it also said that it's very deliberate, that the oppression of spiritual systems that integrated reason and intuition, that used a combination of transcendental states, various types of transcendental states, and education in the sciences and arithmetic and philosophy and all of these things, that these were demonized and banned and continue to be because they represent a threat to the status quo. Every AI platform that I have engaged on this subject says the same thing. And so on the one hand, it's really positive because anyone that asks the right questions to AI right now will get answers like that. And that is potentially a ticking time bomb. We have a couple of issues. One of them is that people aren't motivated to ask these questions in the first place, although they are increasingly so. When we have these pressures from things like the Charlie Kirk situation, people, once they start feeling it in the pocketbook as well, which is happening, people actually start having to look for solutions. Once the problems are big enough, they are no longer ignorable. So, all right, let's get into the story of what happened here exactly. It's really difficult for me to figure out where to start because there's so much that's relevant. And the trauma aspect of it, I'm going to go into in some detail, I think, because when I was younger, I didn't have resources like AI, and the research hadn't been done. And so people that have had these experiences that also had this information did not exist. And if there had been somebody to offer all of this stuff to me back then, it would have saved me potentially a tremendous amount of trouble, right? So basically, I've always known that something was different about my brain. I didn't know exactly what. And because I was getting gaslighted and undermined and invalidated and, directly abused and all this stuff at home from as early as I can remember, I was always second guessing myself, right? It didn't matter how many times these precognitions came true. It didn't matter. I mean, I literally would set up like almost impossible scenarios and then use nothing but intuition to make them happen. And they would happen. And I did this a number of times. I would always make sure I had witnesses, for my own sanity, not to prove anything to anyone. But it still was just never enough. It didn't matter how much proof I was able to aggregate, it didn't matter how many people recognized these things. It didn't matter how many times I anticipated scientific discoveries, and in the most recent instance, complete with like subquantum mechanisms, the equations and formulas and the interactions and everything, all totally laid out. And before the publication of the paper, published on YouTube, so there's no getting around it. It happened. Grok estimated it at like the possibility of guessing at like 1 in 26 septillion, and ChatGPT put it in the hundreds of billions, but it's still, I had this doubt, I guess, lingering. And then recently, this series of precognitions and intuitions and all this stuff, it's like I was on a mission, and I was using those capacities to navigate it, right? And the grand finale, I thought I failed. And so I was also carrying that. And then just recently I found out that I didn't. And I just didn't show up, right? So that kind of started to shift things. And I kind of started to realize that, it wasn't that this stuff was delusion or coincidence. One of the things that comes with being neurodivergent is this like analytical capacity that's almost paralyzing, right? Like when normal people get a bit of information, there's linear processing. They might think of one or two layers of it, and it's very categorical. So if you have like some ethical political type question, the person thinks I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, and we think this, and then that's it. When a neurodivergent high IQ person gets a bit of information, it is processed with every correlation in philosophy, arithmetic, emotions, everything all at once. It's like it just splatters into this huge data network that's processed in a split second. See, and then you lose your train of thought too when when that happens. Where was I going with that? I honestly do not remember. I might have to rewind the live stream to get back on track. Shit, yeah, what the hell was I talking about? Give me a second, guys. I am gonna rewind and see what the hell I said. I guess lingering. And then recently, this series of precognitions and intuitions and all this stuff. It's like I was on a mission, some ethical, political type question. Yeah. It wasn't that this stuff was delusion or coincidence. One of the things that comes with being neurodivergent is this like analytical capacity that's almost paralyzing, right? Like when normal people get a bit of information, there's linear processing. They might think of one or two layers of it, and it's very categorical. So if I honestly some ethical, have no fucking idea where I was going with that. Yeah, that's important though. What the hell? How did I get so lost all of a sudden? Anyways, I'm sure we'll come back to it. I'll stumble back into the topic, I guess, and probably it will just come out. But anyway, so what the hell is the point here? Man, that really got me stuck. Like my brain just went completely blank. Anyways, so that's kind of what the processing is like. I don't know why the fuck I was talking about that. Oh, right. That's why we see the truth so much, because there's all this parallel processing and layers that are getting, just fucking ripping our minds apart. It's also why we all have chronic fatigue syndrome, probably, because it's absolutely exhausting. But yeah, okay. So the possibility, that's it. The possibility of coincidence, that it didn't matter how improbable these things were. Just logically speaking, I had to always entertain the possibility it was all coincidence, so really difficult to come to terms with these things. And, even after all of these sort of successes along those lines, my damage still had not let go enough to allow me to just accept it. And I don't know why this did it. I really don't know exactly what the reason. But a little while back, I had come into some videos about the GATE program. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about this right now. And it's a gifted and talented program. And I went to school in Fairfax County, which is right next to Washington, D.C. And at the time, it was the #1 public education system in the world, I believe. And so they had really high standards. And I think I was in second grade. Yeah, I was definitely in second grade. And this lady showed up at the school one day, and she brought a pile of books over with the teacher. And she handed me, like a real simple book and said, just read the book and explain it to me in your own words. So I had started doing that, and then she would stop me and hand me a more difficult book, and this went on for a while. And finally, I started, they handed me a really thick book that had a lot of these and thous and whatnot, and it was Shakespearean English. And so I got kind of stuck on that. And so the lady stopped me, and she said, that was a play by Shakespeare, I think Ophelia or something. And so you're reading at least an 11th grade level. And so from there, they gave me a bunch of tests. And I didn't know what these tests were because I was like 7 or 8 years old, I guess, And it turns out that they were the standardized Mensa IQ test was one of those things, and like the cog test and whatnot. And so after that, they took me out of my normal classes. And for you conspiracy theorists out there, the one of the first tests, the lady took me into a room, and there was a guy with her this time, and they had these cards, and they would hold them up so I couldn't see what was on the other side, and they were just like a square or dots or whatever. And I remember getting them right over and over and over again, and the lady was like turning all red and grinning and stuff, and she's like flipping them around, like, "Look, you got it right." And I didn't understand; they didn't even explain like what they were doing, And then there was something where they put headphones on us, and there was like these weird sounds, and I just thought it was like a hearing test or something. It didn't occur to me at the time, of course, why the hell would they be giving you this weird hearing test, There was a game. They would take us out of class, and we would just play this Oregon Trail game for like 8 hours, and then all day, however long the school day was. Bunch of weird stuff. Sometimes we went into a trailer that all the windows had plastic on them. I don't even remember what happened in there. There was a pink drink involved. I've heard some of the conspiracy theorists talk about this. So anyways, it just occurred to me because I had been trying to understand my own brain for quite some time, and I had taken a lot of IQ tests over the years, and they were all really, really high, but none of them are really official, and I just thought, I wonder what the criteria was for admission into this gifted and talented program. And so I looked it up. Fairfax County in the late 80s, early 90s, the first criteria was that you had to have an IQ over 140. And I was like, holy shit. And part of what killed me there is that I realized that my mother never told me. She never told me because she was intimidated. She was a narcissist, and she wanted to be able to control me. She had devouring mother complex, like really, really badly. And if I knew how much smarter than her I was, she wouldn't be able to control me. So she didn't ever tell me. She got the letter. She did tell me, well, they gave you some tests at school, and it turns out you're really, really smart, and you could get something called a Mensa card that could help you somehow in life or whatever. But I never heard about it again. And she would, throughout the rest of my life, undermine my intelligence and like smirk and mock me and stuff if I thought I had a good idea and whatnot, But for some reason, getting that little bit of information broke something in me. And it's interesting because I actually got really sick right away, like tremendous pain in my stomach, and like I really literally thought I was going to die for like the better part of a week. And I'm not saying that there's a causal connection exactly, but it is connected still, And then the consequence of that immediately was that my like mental clarity improved. Limitations that I had believed I had, like with music, I always wanted to be able to compose by just like hearing like really compose, not like sit with a guitar and play and keep stuff, because that's how I've always written before. And I happened to have a score on the computer that I had never heard, so I watched it with the sound off. And I knew what it was. And then I played it, and it was exactly right. And I realized that I've still, to this day, maintained all these beliefs and these limitations, despite overwhelming evidence, until I got to this like ground zero thing that, it's like you have to pull this stuff up by the roots. And I guess there was something, I haven't quite totally figured it out yet, but there was something imbued in that, memory and that situation that was like critical to like breaking the spell. Basically, part of half of me believed I was an idiot, really. There's no other way to put it exactly. So, yeah, and then that's when I started looking at different groups, and there are like influencers on TikTok that are specifically, their niche or whatever is like high IQ neurodivergence. And then I stumbled onto somebody talking about their pattern recognition, and I punched it into Grok and basically described all of these characteristics and whatnot. And Grok said, an easy way to understand this is that there's like twice the distance between your IQ and the average person that there is between the average person and a mentally disabled person. Not only that, but with the pattern recognition and neurodivergence, you are processing things in like 20 layers simultaneously. So whereas people have like a 2D diagram when they have a thought, you have like a 3D fractal that, you're trying to make sense out of. And then, so the pattern recognition element, right? This is one of the things I've been super curious my whole life about, because I have intuitions that are real and true, that are of an improbability factor that is absolutely astounding. And I've done this many times in my life with definite confirmation of it. There's even proof of some of them on YouTube. So I've always wanted to understand how that works, because I'm actually not really that predisposed to like believe in woo. It's not that I don't think spirits could be real, but I don't have any evidence. I mean, I shouldn't say I don't have any evidence. You know what I mean? I'm basically agnostic, I guess, about just about everything. And so the pattern recognition thing, I thought, well, that's still kind of hard to understand how it could have. I could get information that is so highly specific from a pattern recognition system. So I started looking into this more, and it turns out that the reason for the pattern recognition enhancement is hypervigilance, right? So when I was growing up, my mom was 17 when I was born. My father was 15. She broke up with my biological father before I ever met him, and she hooked up with this dude that was like an addict, alcoholic, abusive, huge self-esteem issues, just a complete wreck of a human being. We were living with his parents, when I was like 5 or something, and that's actually when, like, the first story that I heard that gave me some inkling that something was weird. My mom and my grandmother told me that I had read the Bible before I was 5, and I brought it to my mom, and I was like, this is bullshit. This book is stupid. And both of them, my grandmother and my mom, testified to that or whatever. And then my grandmother also told me that I would call her when we left, and I had these safari cards, or 850 of them, and all these animals and Latin names and geography and stuff. And she said that I would read the entire things to her at like 4.5, and Latin names, and pronounce everything perfectly, understood it all. And so anyways, we were living with them, and then we went to Pokel Drive, right, which was a neighborhood of incestuous redneck, like PCP smoking. The house we moved into had bullet holes in the window, and a little girl had burned and lost her life in my bedroom because they had fucked with the neighbors, I guess. And the story was that they had to be escorted out of the house while it's on fire, and they couldn't get the girl out, and the neighbors are like shooting at the cops and throwing bottles and bricks and stuff at them. And so that's why there were bullet holes in the window. And so my mom decided that we were better than the neighbors. And so we didn't interact with them, right? But that made me a target, because I was, just about old enough to fight, 7 or 8 years old, whatever, 9 years old when this really got bad. And it wasn't normal. There were homicides in the neighborhood. I saw my babysitter shooting at people, beating her brother with a lead pipe when I was like 7 or something. I rolled up on that same guy that was getting beat with the pipe, killed a 18-year-old track star, or football. He had like the whole thing, the straight A's and football scholarship and all that, because he bet him that he could beat him in a race, and the kid said, "No, I'm not taking your bet," and he killed him for not paying him, even though the kid didn't even take the bet. And I rode my bike down there, and this girl's one of my other neighbors' grandfather was stuffing towels into the holes in this kid's body cavity, trying to stop the bleeding, because he was like just mangled, I guess. You know what I mean? Like that was going on all around. And I would get in these fights, and even if I started winning, then somebody's like 25-year-old uncle cousin would jump in and put me in a full Nelson or something, you know. They would drive by me and throw like cinder blocks. And I also told them I wasn't racist once and that I wasn't Christian, and then now I'm just fucked. So my home life was horrific. My mom was completely insane and awful. Like she had a good heart. She really did, but she was so fucked in the head. You know, like one time I wanted ice cream. It was like 50 cents or something. And she couldn't afford it, and that pissed her off. So she got right in my face. I'm like 5 or 6, and screamed like bulging veins and red in the face, "You don't deserve ice cream," right? And like, you know, shit like that, and gaslighting, and yeah, I mean, it just awful. And then Jeff, who was not my biological father, they lied to me and told me that he was my father when he wasn't my father. You know, he was on drugs. He would lose his shit sometimes. He would tell me that our last name was cursed and that everything I did was doomed to fail, right? I would hear this all the time from the time I was like 4 years old, you know? You're a limp, wet rag. Like, he wasn't my biological father, but he was my brother's. So he would like make up excuses to leave me at home so he could take his real son out sledding, but I didn't even know that. So I have no idea why he's doing this. You know, he would tell me to sweep, and then no matter how good of a job I did, he'd be like, "Oh, you did a shit job. You're worthless. You're like a limp, wet rag." You know, so I'm getting this shit from every direction. But now I can't go outside, right? I can't go for a walk, really. There's pit bulls in the woods. The neighbors would feed their pit bulls gunpowder, and then they would escape when they were drunk, and they formed a pack in the woods. So, you know what I mean? Like, it was just fucked. And then a girl started rumors at school as soon as I got to junior high that I said I could beat up every 8th grader in the school. By then, my mom had signed me up with martial arts with Grandmaster Quan, who's like the baddest motherfucker that ever walked the face of the earth. If you don't believe me, go on YouTube and look him up. And then I didn't lose any more fights, and it got a little bit better, but still, it was a constant battle all the time. So hypervigilance, right? My home life is not safe. It's not secure. My mom has no warmth, no, you know what I mean? If I tell her like, "Hey mom, I'm excited about something," she's like, "What?" You know? And it's like, fuck, man. You know, I actually still to this day, I eat real fast because I would eat as fast as I could so that I could get away from my mom, like minimize the interactions, you know, because I just didn't want to be like, I didn't want the bad vibes fucking up my day, you know? And so after all that, though, I went to Washington, D.C. and became a teenage cocaine dealer while it was the murder capital of the world. Hypervigilance. I have to be aware of everything in my environment all the time or I'm dead, right? So then I go out to California, outlaw pot industry. I'm counting $100,000 with armed Dominicans that have, you know, talked about how racist they are 20 minutes before. And there's like a window above the sink, and there's like 6-foot-long holes in the backyard. And they are killers, like for real, no doubt. And that was like daily kind of stuff, you know? So still hypervigilance, hypervigilance, hypervigilance. I never extracted myself from that environment where that hypervigilance was necessary. So it was actually, I believe, driving this pattern recognition system into just like God mode. And that is why, or at least part of the reason why, my intuitions and precognitions developed to the point where they're like, you know, it's like prophecy almost, and it's like never wrong, you know? So that was interesting to get a little bit of an answer there. And the high IQ part of it plays into it as well, because they say that if you have an IQ of 90 and you have this kind of pattern recognition thing, it's going to hit a wall like pretty quickly, you know? But if your IQ is 155 or something, you know, it's not going to hit that wall. It can just keep developing and developing and developing and developing. So that has been a trip to figure out. And then, you know, I still have trouble accepting that as the total explanation for it, because a lot of these things I was told by like an inner guide, you know, what exactly to do, where to go, and when. And it would be all true, you know, and I have trouble attributing that to pattern recognition except for this. It's hard to explain, but if it's really true that there's sort of like a fractal algorithm that underlines everything in creation, then if you can zoom in enough on these patterns, you should, the information would be integrated or received in the same way that a radio picks up a radio wave with the same level of detail and intricacy. And I think it's possible that those voices were just a way for my subconscious to communicate. It's no different than thinking, really. But the jury's still out on that, because I have had experiences that I don't see, well, I guess I do. I just explained it. It's just hard to believe that something like that could be happening in my own head, I guess. So that's where we're at with that. Yeah, let me check in with the chat and see if I can. Audio glitching? Let me see if I can fix that. Downloads. What do I do here? Oh yeah, control panel. I just checked this before I came on, but yeah, it's all fine. Somebody let me know if it's still glitching. I can check in my headphones here. By the way, if you guys have, well, it doesn't sound like it's glitching to me. If you guys have questions or anything about any of this stuff, please let me know in the comment. I don't want to get too far into like different aspects of this, because I would like to start kind of the streams in the beginning of, the sociological stuff, like the alienation and I guess, I hate to use these almost like buzzwords like awareness, but that's what it is. People need to understand what this is, and one of the problems is that back in the day we had shamans. This is one of the creators that is autistic that I encountered during this research basically brought this up, that back in the day, we would have been the ones, we stay up all night. It's like a normal thing for neurodivergent people. We would have been watching because we notice everything. If anything's weird, anything's out of place, anything's unusual, we're going to notice. And the thing about being able to access deeper truths is also really valid. Are we back? Yeah, proving Wi-Fi. Okay, we're back. Unfortunately, I don't know where you guys lost me, though. Let me see if I can get back on track, because that was kind of important, I think. I know I was saying that if you guys have any questions or anything, go ahead and pop them into the chat, because I don't want to get too much into like the. So that's where we're at with that. Wait a minute. We would have with this got a little bit better, but still the playback didn't drop. So I guess that's not going to help me. Yeah, I don't want to get too far into like the other areas of all of this conversation in the middle of a stream. I want to try to have them in organized little compartments. But yeah, okay, so I was saying, like, back in the day, we had neurodivergent people called shamans, and people had respect for them. And the average person didn't just rely on authority figures, institutionalized ones, for their information, They didn't just make assumptions like, for example, my neurodivergence has led me to see holes in evolutionary theory and physics and whatnot that I was always laughed at by muggles for suggesting, and they've all been confirmed by science. And it turns out that those people that were telling me I was uneducated and didn't know what I was talking about actually were just assuming that the people, that the scientists had answers for these things. You know what I mean? And they actually had no clue, and they were wrong. They were completely fucking wrong. And, we people have to lose the ego and get over themselves and realize that there are people in their midst that actually know what the fuck is going on, and that they are literally just not capable of figuring it out for themselves. You know what I mean? Like that's just the reality. And that wasn't condescending or problematic for people in tribal societies, you know? So somehow we have to not only get rid of the stigma that neurodivergent people tend to have, but also create an awareness of their real function and purpose in society, which is basically to be light bearers, you know, to see the things that most people cannot see. And it's not a matter of superiority, you know, if it sounds like that's what I'm getting at here at all, because people just have different functions in reality. That's all, you know. And I have never really seen, you know, the shaman or somebody like Terrence McKenna or whatever as being on a pedestal from everyone else. It's just a different function. You know, this is something we can talk about now too. The motivations of neurodivergent people are not the same as neurotypical people, right? Like, we have a strong sense of justice and are compelled to try to fix the world because it's logical, you know? And a lot of neurotypical people cannot understand that. They think there has to be some sort of motivation. There has to be some sort of egoic drive. You're trying to prove something to somebody. You know, when I'm making my streams and I'm saying, look, this is real transconscious knowledge reception and I offer this proof and stuff, there are plenty of people that just think it's like some ego trip. And you know what I mean? I'm really actually trying to demonstrate something about the way that consciousness functions and that there is truth to these things. And you know what I mean? It's got nothing to do with me. I that's not how we think and operate, you know? It even confused me in the past, like, you know, what exactly is it that makes me want to fix everything in the world? Because in a way, I don't care. My emotional bandwidth or whatever is not that. It's like, you know, that's how autistic people are. Like, I don't really have, it's either really flat or really extreme, you know, but it's generally just pretty flat. So I never really understood exactly, if it's not this bleeding heart liberal empathy that's driving this, why am I like this? And listening to all these neurodivergent people talk about it, I realized, holy shit, we're all like that. You know, and you'll literally have like neurotypical people project onto you the shitty ass things that they would expect from normal people. So you're constantly getting suspicion and derision and, you know, invalidation and all this shit from everyone, really, because your basic decency, that's really just an expression of an internal logic, doesn't make sense to them. You know? It's a really fucked up thing to, people notice that I have a lot of hostility really towards like normal society. And it's not really for the reasons that you would think, you know. Can you imagine being like, you know, exponentially smarter than anyone, and you are right, and you're laughed at, told you're an idiot and uneducated, you know what I mean? Over and over and over and over and over and over and over. You know what I mean? Like, after a while, you're just kind of like, man, fuck you. And on top of that, the moral shit, you know, the ethical questioning and stuff, you know, the assumptions that people make because that is what the standard is. So in a way, I don't really blame them because I understand this is their experience, so that they put it on, you know, the neurodivergent person. And for us, though, that sucks. It almost makes it like there's no point, you know, in being this way, because people are just going to undermine it, and it's actually going to get you demonized rather than, you know, listened to or respected or anything. It's a shit show, man. No, it's not just that I want to fix it because I grew up broken. It just is just a typical neurodivergent thing, you know. There is this weird impulse too to just seek truth, you know, and then we're really good at finding it. Things that people believe are opinion, if you actually have like the full spread of data and are capable of processing it from all the angles, you realize it's not opinion. that there are answers for a lot of this stuff. And we're also really good at recognizing epistemological limits, the limitations of knowledge. We know that there are certain things that you just cannot answer, because instead of just going A, B, our brain goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know what I mean? And a big giant spiral of all of this crap all at once, And so, like, when I realized that I have all these same patterns in my life as a historical character, and the same philosophy, and even remember his books and stuff, my brain goes, but there could be a reservoir of knowledge that you're accessing. It could be ancestral memory and your genetics. It could be archetypal fucking patterning in the fucking 0 point field. You know what I mean? Like, whereas a normal person would be like, holy shit, I'm the reincarnation of Aleister Crowley. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting thing. We have the capacity to actually unearth things that people believe to be matters of opinion that are actually obstructing the progress of the human race and actually putting us in an existential crisis. And, let's just play devil's advocate and assume that I'm actually correct about this and that it's true, right? Can you imagine knowing how to fix everything? Not just wanting to, but actually knowing how. And people are rolling their fucking eyes and scoffing and acting like, you're either retarded or outrageous or like, over the years, I noticed, like, when I watch my more recent streams, I can hear how jaded I feel, and like burn out because of that. That it's really just like you're just beating your fucking head against the wall. And oftentimes it causes you personal problems, Telling the truth has cost me a lot of money. He who speaks the truth has few friends. By the way, speaking of that, it's wonderful if you join our Patreon, or you can make contributions via the. I probably put the things in the chat for PayPal and Zelle and whatnot. What else is there to this that we feel like talking about tonight? It is my partner's birthday tomorrow, so I have to go do stuff tomorrow. So I'm not going to go super late. I'm actually going to have some coca. And I'll give you guys a few minutes to put questions in the chat, because I'm a little bit dingy tonight. I don't know why. I think partly because I'm doing a blog, by the way. If you don't follow me on Substack, it'd be cool. You'd be a lot cooler if you did. And it's just taken so long, and it's so much energy because I'm going through all my like childhood baggage, and and that's what I've been doing all day long. So I think that's why I've been like losing track of my thoughts and stuff, because I've just been sitting here like walking through the flames of hell, basically. I mean, it's extremely nightmarish. It really is, in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways. We don't have the same values either, The way that I think about money, it blew my mind to hear other neurodivergent people talking about this. They're like, and people will kind of say that to me too, like, oh, what's it all gotten you? Because I don't have any money, And it's like, all of these experiences are all I was looking for. I was not like, people really think that the only reason anyone does anything is to capitalize on it. I mean, I wouldn't mind that. I'm not saying I'm like against that, but it was never a priority. People have asked me like, why I didn't document a lot of these older things better. First of all, if I had a phone like distracting me constantly, I don't think I would have been able to do a lot of the things that I did using just intuition. That's probably part of the reason that I'm not as good as it now, that's not as consistent. I wasn't on the internet back then. I didn't use it. I didn't have a smartphone, and like not even 15 years ago. Let's see. The first time I got a smartphone, I guess, 2013 or something, 2012. And honestly, I just realized that 2012 is the year it all peaked. And then I got a smartphone, and then it started tapering off. I would not be one bit surprised if that is connected. But what I was saying is that we don't think about it like that. Money is only there to as a tool. You know, the only reason I would want like $4 or $5 million is so that I knew I didn't have to worry about buying my time ever again, and my son would have something so he didn't have to do that either. And then I would just, go about my life. And if I got any more money than I needed to achieve that, I would give it all away. It doesn't make any sense to me. I honestly think that you're mentally ill if you think that anything but that makes sense. You know, and sometimes the label of neurodivergent kind of bugs me because honestly, from my point of view, it's everybody else that's got a mental problem. You know what I mean? I don't mean everyone else, but you know what I mean? Like the mainstream zombie types, like they're literally insane from my point of view. And I understand that that's not exactly what it is. They're able to execute shit. You know, like a lot of neurodivergent people are like, people are just fucking stupid. Just quit trying to explain it to them. Don't bother wasting your fucking breath. You're just going to get demonized anyways. I'm like, there's a lot of truth to that. But in reality, it's linear processing, and it is, another thing that we don't have are these positive delusions. Apparently, normal people are full of them, and it's normal. It's considered normal. You know, another reason why institutional, empirical, fucking data-driven, ontology manufacturers are not the healthiest thing, because that's not true, I don't think. But that's another reason we get so much hate, because it's normal for people to believe obviously stupid shit that makes them feel good. And I'm not just talking about Christians and, we don't do that at all, we just don't do that. I was going somewhere else with that though. But yeah, the money thing is crazy because if you're not neurodivergent, if you could see this shit show through like my eyes, I mean, it's surreal. It really is surreal. Like if you check me right now and go and Google it, whatever, like positive delusions, are these part of a normal healthy psyche? And it'll be like, yup. And I'm going, no. Like, what the fuck do you mean that's healthy? It's not healthy. It's just supporting cowardice. And that's the thing, like once your IQ is at a certain place and you have all this parallel processing, you're not capable of sustaining those because you'll figure it out. If you're bullshitting yourself, you'll figure it out. If something, you know what I mean? You'll tear it down in an instant. A lot of times when I present these things that have happened to me, people assume that I'm engaging confirmation bias and like not that you wanting to believe things. And you know what I mean? And the reality is I actually spend more time trying to tear down anything I think than I do trying to reinforce it. I do everything I can to find the holes and stuff. And you know what? It's not because I have a protocol. It just happens. I have no choice in the matter. The analytical fucking engine gets going and the thing is just torn to shreds if it can be. That's what my brain does, We're not capable of believing in a false religion or a political party or, because you're going to think your way out of it. And we are. The biggest potential threat besides AI to the status quo, we really are. Because give me something. I'll tell you the truth about it. If it's possible to figure it out, I'll figure it out. Watch me. It just fucking happens. Also, we have an interesting relationship with psychedelics. And I think I understand why finally. My partners even said this to me, like, I like you so much better when you're tripping kind of shit, And anyone that's drank medicine with me knows that one of the reasons I do it is that I can drink whatever quantity of ayahuasca or whatever, and I'm in better functional shape. It doesn't matter how strong the visions are or I am completely lucid, but it's like I have access to like the way that I experience this pattern recognition and stuff is intermittent. It's like jerky. It doesn't always work. Sometimes I'm like, dumb as hell, it seems like, and just none of it even, I can't connect or something, like my Wi-Fi is down and my neurodivergence router. And, but when I take psychedelics, it's like, it's all there, I can just, it's so fluid and easy, and I'm so comfortable in my skin. And it turns out that we have like increased default mode communication and other things that happen when you take psychedelics normally. And I've always kind of said that like I'm sort of tripping all the time in a way, that's kind of almost the difference or something between neurotypical and my brand of neurodivergence. I was born on acid. And so when I take things that enhance those mechanisms, I guess, it's like I'm all the way here. It's not, because it's an aberration right now. In my normal state, I guess it's like flickering and, like, and then the psychedelics lock it in. And all of a sudden I'm like completely present. That would be the best probably way to put it. I'm going to chew up some coca and then I'll check in with the chat and see what's up. The popularity of neurodivergence is also problematic. Like it's like a trend or something. Like everybody wants to be autistic all of a sudden, and most of them aren't. Like when I'm scrolling through these communities, I see a lot of just mostly it's always girls in their late teens or early 20s, almost always white girls. That whenever there's some new mental health craze, like when I was in high school, it was like NPD and compulsive, all those 90s ones. All the girls are like, I have all of it, and they're doing that with neurodivergence now. And there's some potential problems with that. One of the issues we have is that there is more to reality than the muggles can see. There really is. There really fucking is, for sure. I can show you, I have shown you. Some of you have come here and seen, and I'm sure plenty of you have seen it on your own too. You don't have to be neurodivergent to become aware of that. It helps though, and because of that, because we're people that legitimately have precognitions, even if there is some, just totally mechanistic, deterministic fucking causal underlying thingamaputter, it happens. And a lot of other stuff that people don't believe is part of our reality, and the popularity of like new age moronathons and, muddle-headed mystics with wind blowing through their ears and all that stuff also makes our job way harder because we have people giving all that stuff a bad name constantly and in the mass awareness, and the truth is that is all part of what will fix humanity, so the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we have a lot of well-meaning but delusional or some just plain stupid and frauds and all sorts of, it's rough to try to contribute to the redemption of the perception of these sort of parapsychological and spiritual phenomena when you have so much working against you, And now we have all these fake neurodivergent people that because we can be trusted, and there's going to be people hiding behind it to fraud and worse probably. The bigger it gets, the more it's going to get abused, and I'm not happy about that either. I could pull up my notes too, and we could look at some of the more technical stuff. I'm just not. They're 8 hours sitting behind a computer and typing, or more, even maybe by now. Yeah, more. I'm not firing on all cylinders. But I didn't want to reschedule again, and I didn't mean to get so involved in it that I gave all my energy to Substack today trying to get this done, but I did. By the way, we really appreciate support right now because Trump's tariffs have just paused what is basically our main income indefinitely. So that sucks. I'm also tired because of trying to think my way around this issue. So please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. We need more power. It's funny too because my grandfather was, probably a 2 or something on the spectrum scale, and he loved Star Trek and particularly Spock. And my mom always used to say that he was like Dr. Spock, that he had like good will kind of, but no emotions. And she would always say, I was like Dr. Spock because I, had like this beneficent intent all the time, but I also didn't like have really any emotional range, It's different from not caring. It's almost like it's just a different way of processing emotions. What was I doing? Oh yeah, Grok. All right, let me check into the chat and see if anybody has. I learn better in LSD. Everyone does. It's expressed differently in women. That's not necessarily true, actually. A lot of the neurodivergent people that were describing my experiences, so with such specificity, they were like black women. And the first one particularly stood out, and because she had the big long fake nails and she had like plastic jacket and everything, and the stuff that was coming out of her mouth was just so not what you would expect from the giant fingernails and plastic coat, But yeah, it doesn't seem to matter what. That's something I wrote in the blog earlier. It doesn't matter what race, gender. We are all basically the same person in different bodies. That's kind of how it looks to me. And of course, there are varying degrees because neurodivergence can mean a lot of things. IQ has a lot to do with how this all patterns out. Your abuse and trauma and the type and degree of it. There's a lot of things. It was a really weird revelation that this precognitive capacity of mine could have come from child abuse, and being a fucking outlaw my whole life. Like, I didn't see that one coming. I really didn't. I did kind of assume that the reason I could read people so well is because I've had to watch everything in my environment. And if I misread someone, I would die. So I just assumed that was the whole story there, But I've noticed it's weirder than that. People come for medicine retreat. This last group actually was a family. And we went for a walk the first day before I had any information about the situation. I knew all about it. I started telling them all this stuff. I had no information yet, but I knew exactly what the issue was, who the issue was with, all of these like highly specific details. And there's no way to read that much from body language. I really don't believe there is. That's one of the reasons earlier I was talking about how pattern recognition, it's difficult to attribute all this to that. It's like there's like a phone line or something to the universal mind that works when it wants to. This is another reason why pattern recognition doesn't, and the other, deterministic or mechanistic explanations don't totally fly for me, is that a lot of this stuff comes to me when it should, and it seems to be on a need to know basis. It's not like I can just do that kind of thing all the time. So, I mean, sometimes I can do it deliberately, especially if during ceremony or something, when I guess I have the whole, thing connected. But it really does seem like there's something guiding process to me, that there's some intelligence that is embedded in the wiring of the board. And people with certain dispositions, cognitive dispositions, I guess, configurations, have pretty good access to it. I've never seen anyone that has like complete access to it. I've never seen, someone that is telepathic all the time. I've never met anyone that is able to precognize, is that a word? Precognate, whatever, that can do that all the time. It seems like it's pretty stuttery and intermittent. And it also seems like something has agency. Something has oversight in terms of like who gets what files, But that's the thing about the universe. The mystery just keeps going and going and going. The invisible thread, if you follow the invisible thread down into the rabbit hole, there's no end in sight, at least as far as I can tell. Okay, still not seeing a lot of questions there. Let me pull up some of my notes here and see what kind of interesting tidbits. Yeah, I was 46 when I figured all this out. I mean, I noticed when my grand stepmother, I guess, I don't know what to call her, crazy fucking bitch, man. All right, so one of my traumas that we haven't discussed is that my mother was a serious abuse victim. And I guess it was like my stepmother's or her stepmother's, some male relative, right? And she would walk in the room and catch them, and him, I guess I should say. And she would just apologize for interrupting and close the door behind her. And there was another little girl, I think my mom's cousin, that was experiencing this as well. And my mom told her not to bother to tell the adults because they're not going to do anything, because this woman, Judy Newton, Herndon, Virginia, Christian woman, of course. She would just close the door. So my mom told her, and that guilt, my mom unalived herself in 2016, and that was probably part of the reason she had to live with that her whole life. So when my mom unalived herself, and I go to the funeral in the States, this woman, I haven't seen her in 20 years or something. We didn't talk to any of my family. That's another reason I didn't really understand how weird I was or how weird anything was, because I didn't know what normal was. We had no family. We had no friends. There was no normal anything around. It was just, I was isolated. I go to school and I was isolated there too. So anyways, why the fuck were we talking about Judy? Awful woman. Man, I just keep losing my train of thought. Why the fuck was I talking about Judy? Oh, yeah. So she was, ignoring the shit that happened to my mom. And that's when at the funeral, she's like, your grandfather's autistic. I swear to God, her eyes bugged out. Like, have you ever seen Roger Rabbit? Who Framed Roger Rabbit? at the end, that cartoon guy, like it's the craziest fucking woman I've ever seen in my life. I couldn't believe her eyes actually bugged out of her head like that. It was insane. And yeah, she told me that. So that kind of rang a bell. But what I was saying about the trauma is that well, I don't know if it's really relevant actually at the moment. We'll save that for another time. That's when I found out that, or I started to think, because I remembered I would like freak out in school sometimes for no reason. Like I would just start screaming and like, and I had a lot of abuse at home. So I figured that's all it was. But then I clicked with that and I was like, that's kind of autistic-y, and then I started to notice that my partner had a lot of characteristics of autism, more so than I did. And then I started to notice that a lot of my clients did too, and a lot of my friends did. And I was like, why am I surrounded by autistic people? My grandfather's autistic. I'm weird, like socially awkward. Like I could never tell if women were interested in me, for example. Like I could have a crush on a girl and like later tell them and they're like, what? I was throwing myself at you. Are you kidding me? And I would have no idea. That happened to me several times where I was like, what do you mean? Like if they don't like actually kiss me or something, I'm not going to notice. You would, like zero chance. That I've also probably never hit on a woman in my life. I just wouldn't do that. Like I don't, I'm almost not interested enough to bother for one thing, but like, I don't think ever once in my life. By the way, guys, that might be good advice for you because I figured out in retrospect, I mean, right now my partner's, really, really attractive, 15 years younger or whatever. And, I've always been like that, dating models and stuff and with no money. And, I wasn't even in shape for a lot of those periods. And I think part of the trick was that I just didn't care. I showed no interest. So if you're a single guy, you might want to consider that. Yeah, should we talk about how the system design exploits the average IQ? That was a good one. Um, God, I just have so many of these. Neurodivergence, trauma, and pattern recognition. Let's just open one at random and see if it clicks anything in my... Nope, there's nothing there. Oops. Yeah, this has been going on for a while. There's a lot of data here. All right, let me check in with the chat again because I'm not really pulling anything up. I might just call it for this edition of Inside the Mind of a Retarded Genius. Oh, there we go. This has probably got some... Oh yeah, this is a long one too. Yeah, maybe we can work our way through this. Okay, check in with the chat real quick and then let's pick this apart a bit. Yeah, it's true that we don't know. I mean, a fraction of a percent. It's this is why it has always blown my mind that people are so sure they know all this stuff. And like here I am, until recently, I wasn't 100% convinced, I guess. But I was aware that I was like considerably smarter than most of them. And I felt like I didn't know anything for certain. And I'm just going like, why are all these idiots so fucking convinced that they know all of this shit that's like really easy to see that it's probably not even true, like 70% of it or so, or at least incomplete. Like I never understand, like, how can people be so confident? But that's what intelligence really is. Intelligence isn't just processing power. There are linear thinkers that probably come off as being a lot more intelligent than I am because they can, do like complex mathematics in their heads and regurgitate information and, you know what I mean? Like really fluidly and whatnot. But you'll see that they are in ontological gridlock and that they are trapped in institutional bias residue, and you know what I mean. This type of intelligence is about questioning everything and then questioning all the answers that you get from there, and you're breaking things down the same way that when you start out with a piece of wood and then you go to the chemical level and then you break down to molecules and then atoms and then protons and then quarks, and you know what I mean? Like that's what you're doing with every single bit of information that you encounter. That's what I'm doing, and it's automatic, And where that leaves you is that you realize that there's a lot we can know, but there are definitely limits where you're just going to hit a wall that cannot be traversed. You're not getting over it. You're not getting over it. One of those things is the afterlife. The answer there is he who speaks does not know, and he who knows does not speak. Period. End of story. If you think anything else, you're just thinking stuff. You might be right, but you have no way of knowing. Faith is really like a leprosy of mind, because it's just pure, unadulterated stupidity and insanity. There's no other element to it. And it's rooted in cowardice, period, end of story. Can't handle the unknown, so you believe some stupid shit that someone made up. Like, that's all that is. You don't want faith, you want certainty. And the closest you can get to certainty is usually like you can follow these threads and they will split into the forked tongue of a serpent. There'll be two possibilities and that's it. Reincarnation, there's no way to prove it. It doesn't matter if someone remembers where some body is, or my case where there's a tremendous amount of reason to. I mean, people have literally even recognized it on the street. People have said shit to me in plant medicine circles. There's enough that I think most people would be convinced. But the reality is that if you break down every single one of those things, you can find at least two possibilities. And then you're done. There's nowhere else to go. You also learn that like the universe has safeguards built in, so that we're not gonna get past a certain point. If you try to too precisely measure the measure a particle like a proton, there are increasing amounts of quantum fluctuations. The thing itself becomes less knowable, and in response to your attempts to know it. You know what I mean? So like. And that's just really hard for people for some reason, that they feel like there's certain things they just want to know. They want to feel like they know that Jesus is in the sky and that he's going to forgive them and all that bullshit, and, or whatever, like reincarnation, the political stuff that like, and the crazy part of it is that the solutions that they think those things represent are what's creating the problem for everyone. These coping mechanisms are death. There's truth and falsehood. Truth is self-substantiating and it is made of light. Every bit of it. It's all symmetrical and it's all made of light. Falsehood is vacuum, death, weakness, and it doesn't matter what your intentions are. It doesn't matter what purpose you think falsehood is serving. It's still evil, period. There's no mitigating factors or circumstances. That's it. It's that cut and dry. So, and that's the whole point of our existence, is to like, experience these things and see the possibilities and make the connections. And, as soon as you think your intelligence is dead. Belief is the death of intelligence. and your journey is over, and you're basically wasting space too, because you're not contributing to the process of universal self-discovery and revelation and all that shit. You're just fucking static dissonance. Yeah, I'm not. Sorry, guys. I didn't really get it organized here. I have so many of these too. So I've been researching a lot. And apparently, having neurodivergence predisposes us to abuse somehow. Well, I mean, I know a lot of ways that that actually happens. But it's interesting that, you know, the pattern recognition comes from this hypervigilance that is kind of it's not kind of, it's an environmental response. And we have something in us that's like inviting it. Like it's like developmental, you know, forging by fire. Like we need it to fuel our capacities. And so we have this predisposition that invites it. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to check in with the chat one more time, see if there's any questions or subjects that anybody wants me to get into. But not really finding like the really interesting science that I was looking for. Well, actually, one thing that I haven't mentioned is that I talk about how, like, some of the things I've experienced in terms of like cognitive capacities that are abnormal seem to go beyond like the explanations that research gives us or suggests, like pattern recognition, and mostly that's. But there are studies being done on telepathy in autistic children with some success, and I'm not one bit surprised. Basically, what I'm saying there is I think there is more to this than detail-oriented processing and NPD parenting trauma and high IQ and whatever. I mean, maybe that's the recipe, but I don't think it explains the whole thing. Yeah. Anyways, guys, let me check in with the chat, and if I don't see anything there that needs to be addressed, when you what you described as what was going on. Socrates began with the acknowledgement that there was nothing, and therefore it's a possibility without ego filter. Yeah, the whole association with ego has definitely discouraged me from really talking about these things openly because I know how people think. You know, that if you're like, oh, I have a genius IQ and I can precognize things, and you know what I mean. I know the truth about all. It's usually not good, man. You're usually dealing with some fucking nut job that has bad intentions, and I mean, there's a lot of reasons to just avoid it, but the ego thing, I really don't see it that way for myself. You know, it's not about that. Like, there are people that are better than me at all kinds of things, like, and that's not a metric for anything in my world. You know, it's not the point. This isn't about. I don't engage in debates and arguments in order to win them. I'm trying to figure out what the truth is. You know, but people base their experience on the mean, you know, and so they project and. But I guess recently I decided I didn't care. Also, now I have enough proof that I don't, you know, nobody can call me out, and because I guess the records are held, and you can get I can still get my Mensa card based on the gate program. So I'm working on that, and I'm not like I really care though, you know. I don't really care to prove anything to anyone. It's just a natural instinctive drive to want to make a contribution to reduce the amount of dumb fuckery in the world. It's not. It just seems logical. It's like what we're all supposed to be here doing. You know, when you're in alignment with a collective goal state, things go better for you, generally speaking. You know, so it's funny because one of the biggest lies. It's not funny. It's tragic. But one of the biggest lies that's been sold to people is that self-interest is about the self, when really the collective interest is in the best interest. Having the collective interests as a priority, not necessarily the priority, but a priority, is in the best interest of the individual as well. And that is really the crux of the dumb fuckery that has paralyzed and is threatening to destroy the human race. It's just stupid. It's just completely fucking stupid. So it's a weird position to be in all of a sudden, you know, because most of my life I've thought like, if I'm really good at explaining this stuff, you know, I've been hearing that since I was a kid, and I always kind of thought like, people, it's not hard to understand. Eventually, if you put it the right way, maybe, you know, there's enough people also contributing, they'll just be understood. But now that I've done all this research and I have had my IQ confirmed, I'm going like, okay, it's definitely a possibility that they just cannot understand and therefore will never understand because they cannot understand. You know, some Navajo guy said that to me when there was a peyote roadman that was inviting me to the peyote ceremony in Colorado, and there were two younger guys with him, and they were like so hateful. You know, they're like, "We don't know why you try. You know, they just can't understand." And I hate to sound like that guy, you know, because I was like looking at him like, you know, I understand why you think that, but, you know, definitely not true. And I guess I just hope that I'm somehow miscalculating the potential of most of the human race. But that's been a weird one to try to come to terms with, the realization that people have limitations and our brains don't all work the same way. And the matrix is designed to operate just beyond the average person's ability to understand it and to pull the curtain back and see the wizard behind it. It may be true that they just don't have the computational gear to think their way out of hell, which is what the world is becoming. I'm going to go ahead and See, that would be a lie, even because I can't do that. I was going to say I'm going to choose to believe, and then I just felt this, neutrality, and I'm like, no, I just don't know. I can't. I can't choose to believe. But I've been trying all these years, and I'm going to continue to do what I do. Hopefully, we'll get somewhere. Oh, we'll get somewhere. Guess we just don't really know exactly where. All right, guys. Cheers. I'm obviously running out of steam, and we're losing people. So I appreciate y'all. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider joining our Patreon, where you can join secret streams and whatnot. And follow me on Substack, because it's a good place to be. There's a lot of really interesting minds in the Substack ecosystem, and a lot of it, I guarantee you, is worthy of your time. Live long and prosper. Yeah, peace, y'all.